Hello and good morning, everyone, or afternoon or evening, wherever you're sitting in your part of the world. Welcome to another episode of Chocolatey Explained. Um, so I'm Adil Leghari. I'm a senior solutions engineer at Chocolatey and your host here. And at Chocolatey, we are the Windows automation experts. So this is episode 3 of our Chocolatey Explained series. So for those of you joining us for the first time, Chocolatey Explained was born out of a Twitch stream series that we did called 12 Days of Chocolatey. And this is just the next iteration of that. So we decided we wanted to give our community a chance to deep dive into certain Chocolatey features and functionality with us, and as well as ask questions and interact with us. So thanks for joining us again. And I am very privileged to be joined by our lead architect, Gary Ewan Park. Gary, do you want to say hello?
Hello, Adil. How are we doing today?
Pretty good, sir. Even better because I know that you're going to be driving the majority of this demo, so that's great. Yeah. So you've been hard at work on some of these new features with Chocolatey GUI and Chocolatey Central Management, right? So you can be sharing some of that stuff with us today.
That's the idea, yes. So we shipped new releases of both CCM, Chocolatey GUI, and the Chocolatey GUI license extension. So there's been some new functionality being added to all those recently.
Yeah, we've definitely been hard at work internally, right? So it's cool to finally be able to share with our community some of the stuff that we came up with. Yeah. So this is what's new. This is the what's new episode 3. So I'll run through a little bit of the agenda here, and then I'll hand over to Gary to actually show us some of the stuff, and I'll be asking him some random questions throughout the way and bothering him like I always do. So in the agenda, first, we're going to talk about Chocolatey GUI and the updates to Chocolatey GUI. The big one, of course, that most of us techies enjoy is dark mode. We finally have dark mode now for Chocolatey GUI. It's been a long time coming, and I think special thanks to a couple of folks in the community, right? Gary, I think Punker76 was involved with a bunch of that stuff too.
Ewan was pretty much solely responsible for adding the dark mode into Chocolatey GUI. So Ewan is a maintainer of another open source project called MatApps, which Chocolatey GUI uses. So through adding functionality into MatApps, it made the theming of Chocolatey GUI, I'm going to say easy in quotes because I don't actually know what Ewan did, but it looks amazing. So it's really good to finally be able to ship that.
Yeah, it's a good job. I just wanted to shout out to Ewan because he's been hard at work there. So let's talk about a couple of things. So there's some global Chocolatey GUI features that you can configure now, as well as, and this is a big one, we've made some upgrades to our documentation, right? So we've been hard at work. That's been one of our commitments this year to really tighten up documentation in general and make that really supported and refined. So I think with the launch of docs.chocolatey.org, that was a big one for us because that made it possible for us to actually have a separate site dedicated to documentation, and it's powered by Algolia search as well, right? And so that makes it really easy to be able to search against. So I think particularly maybe in the demo, we can show that off a little bit, Gary. You can show off the docs. Gary's actually recorded videos for each of these different features, so you can go back and watch them later too. I mean, you can always watch the stream as well, but yeah, that's a big improvement. Is we've tried to make our docs a little bit more narrative in how we describe, the different situations you go through as an admin. So talking about Chocolatey GUI licensed extension as well. So there's a bunch of features you do see in Chocolatey GUI. There's a lot of toggles, a lot of buttons. In general, in those settings, though, there's a lot of additional features that you can get with the licensed extension. So if you have a license for Chocolatey for Business, you're going to get a bunch of value add features. And we're going to go through some of those things here too. Default source definition is a big one that we've gotten from customers where they want to define a default source for self-service. So if anybody opens up the panel and they have self-service enabled for a source, then even a not in bin can just go directly to that one source. In addition, background mode, of course, the old Chocolatey agent. That's a part of Chocolatey for Business. In addition to that, branding, which we've had for a while, read-only mode is a big one. So I'll let Gary speak to that a little bit more, but it basically making it so that users can only see what's available locally and they can't even see any of your sources. Allow admin-only access to settings is another one similar to that, where you're sort of obscuring away the settings menu from endpoint users. And the last piece is prevent package icon downloads. That's a big one because, if we work with contractors in secure environments and a lot of companies that have very sensitive information. So in those, secure or government or defense landscapes, we have to support firewalled or air-gapped environments, and as a part of that support, you want to not have a failure or a little red X on the screen whenever an icon is not available in Chocolatey GUI. So we've worked around that with a way that Gary will show off today on the screen. So and we'll end with a little bit of information about Chocolatey Central Management. So we've done a big feature, revisionary bug fix sort of release, but also a couple of the features have been refined a little bit. So Gary will touch on that as well. So without further ado, I am going to hand over to Gary for the meat of this talk. So we'll get into the demo. So I'll stop sharing here, Gary. I'll let you take over. And I'll just chirp from the background.
So hopefully everyone could see my screen. So yeah, as Adil kind of mentioned, one of the things I'll touch on first is the documentation that we've added to docs.chocolatey.org. So if there are any questions about anything that we walked through here today,
sorry, Gary,
feel free. Yeah,
I think you've got the big screen up, so not the individual windows. Yeah.
Let's do that. Sorry.
No problem.
I did this.
We're doing it live. I love it.
There we go. So
awesome.
Hopefully you can see just my VM. So one of the things, if there are any questions, feel free to reach out in the chat and we'll do our best to answer them. But in terms of the docs changes that we've added, obviously we do have the new dedicated website, docs.chocolatey.org, and as Adil mentioned, there is a new search engine that powers the background of that. So if you were to search for something like the allow non-admin access to settings that Adil touched on, then the search engine is much better than it was before, and it can provide you information about it directly. So what you'll find now is hopefully a consistent format in terms of the documentation. So there'll be an explanation of the feature itself, what it does, how it does it. And you'll also find a short video that goes into the details of what's included, how it works, and then obviously how you can run that either at the command line or through Chocolatey GUI itself. So that's what the documentation side of things is. If there's any feedback on that, things that we can do better, we're always open to that sort of feedback. So feel free to bring that to us. So in terms of what's new in Chocolatey GUI, Adil mentioned it, and it is the big one. So let's just talk about it first. So we added a dark mode into Chocolatey GUI. The default, though, when you first open Chocolatey GUI, it is still going to use the light mode by default, but you can toggle that on and off on a per session basis up at the top here. So I can flip to the dark mode and we will see it in all its glory. And then if you wanted to flip back at any point during the execution of Chocolatey GUI, then you can just use this toggle button up at the top. If your preference is that you want to run the dark mode all the time, then that's when you would come into settings. So you'd come into settings here and you would toggle the default to dark mode feature, which I believe is down at the bottom here. So default to dark mode is currently disabled, but if I enable that, then for my current user, that setting is now going to be remembered. So if I go back into Chocolatey GUI, the main page, and then I close this down, and then if I open it up again, then it's obviously going to remember that setting, and it's going to default to dark mode as shown here. So again, even though it's default into dark mode, you still have the option to toggle obviously on and off to your heart's content. Okay.
So that's really cool, Gary. And I just want to, not to interrupt, but I love to interrupt. So the idea, sort of like the one thing to take home for this, folks, is most of our features that we have, we always have the ability. One of the things I love about this is we have the ability to configure it globally in the UI, and we also have the ability to configure it from the CLI. So you have both options. So you can command line configure a lot of things to happen by default, and you can also configure them in the GUI as well. So I love that part of it is we support both pipelines, right? So either if you want to do it from a graphical way or a pipeline way.
Yes, absolutely. So what you've touched on there is one of the new features that actually comes with the 0.18.0 release of Chocolatey GUI, and that is the concept of a global configuration. So what I mean by that is if I'm in Chocolatey GUI and I'm editing settings here, then I'm editing those settings for me, the currently logged in user. But we had a lot of feedback from various people and various folks using Chocolatey GUI that they wanted the ability to be able to set a default set of settings for everyone on their machine. So the way that we do that is through the CLI. So you can't, at the minute, you can't set global settings through Chocolatey GUI itself, but you can through the Chocolatey GUI CLI. So if I close this, and hopefully this is big enough that everyone can see, if I run Chocolatey GUI CLI, then this is the command line equivalent of Chocolatey GUI, and it gives you access to the features and settings within Chocolatey GUI itself. So for example, it's very similar to how Chocolatey itself works. I can run Chocolatey GUI CLI feature list, and it will list me out all of the current settings for me. Again, this is the equivalent of my settings as the currently logged in user. However, what you can also do is you can run Chocolatey feature list global, and it will explain, or it will output the settings that are set currently for the machine level. Okay, so the distinction there is that, for example, the show console output feature isn't enabled globally, but I do have it enabled locally. So I've overridden the global setting to make it so that everyone can so I've overridden it so for me as a user will show the console output, but for everyone else on the machine, it's disabled by default. So what that means is if you wanted to enable, for example, if you wanted to enable the, I can't type, if you wanted to enable the default to dark mode setting globally on the machine, then you would run that command. So at that point, anyone who's logged into the machine will get dark mode by default. So we've expanded the installation parameters for the Chocolatey GUI package. You can set these at the point of installation. So you could just do choco install Chocolatey GUI -- parameters default to dark mode, and then it would set it as you're installing the package, and you can set it globally as well if you chose to, or using the Chocolatey GUI CLI if you're using some sort of config management system like the Ansibles, the Chefs, the Puppets, then you can run the Chocolatey GUI CLI command in the same way that you do the choco config command to set those values.
Right. Okay? So even if you're using like an RMM tool or something where you can remotely execute PowerShell commands on the machine, you could still just pass these commands. So what I'm seeing here, Gary, as well, is there's quite a few things that are available to configure via the CLI. There may be some settings that are not there yet, but a bunch of them you are able to do there. So if you wanted to do that, you can just list that. Go ahead.
Absolutely. So all the features that are available in Chocolatey GUI are available at the command line. It's exercising the same code internally. So anything that you can set through the UI, you can set through the CLI as well at both the user level and the global level. The one distinction that I will make, though, and it is noted here. So, for example, this hide all remote Chocolatey sources, I think you mentioned in the intro. It is a feature, but it is noted here that it will only work if you're using the Chocolatey GUI CLI, Chocolatey GUI licensed extension. If you don't have the licensed extension, you can toggle that feature on and off all day, but Chocolatey GUI itself won't actually do anything. So, it's similar to how Chocolatey extension itself works in that the functionality doesn't exist in the open source, but once you add the extension, that's when it starts lighting up that different pieces of functionality.
I see. So that's an important distinction to make. And maybe when we get through some of the earlier features here that you want to show off, we'll go through and detail some of that other stuff that's specifically Chocolatey for business stuff. And that's a good distinction to make. So you can always see that, folks, in the settings. A lot of those individual parameters, like stuff like I think there was hide all remote Chocolatey sources, and there was a couple of others where specific to Chocolatey for business, and it says it in the GUI as well. But that functionality is available as a part of sort of Chocolatey agent background mode. Some of the other stuff that we give you that is admin only for C4B users.
So the other thing I wanted to touch on just briefly is that there were a couple of breaking changes in the 0.18.0 release of Chocolatey GUI, and that's where we flipped some of the defaults for some values. So one of them was the default value for showing the tile view. So in the previous releases of Chocolatey GUI, it would show a list of packages rather than the tile view. But in this release, we flipped that over, so it will show tile view by default. But as I've just explained, if your preference is to show the list view, you can absolutely set that at the global level now, so that it rolls out to all your machines with that default, or all the people on your machines with that default, if your preference is the list view.
Yeah.
So you can still do that.
Very cool. So I will say that, folks, I apologize if you wanted the other way. This is just what we kept hearing from customers again and again. And so we make it a habit to try and listen to our community and our customers as much as possible. So you can feel free to blame me for this one, because I think there's plenty of folks who came in to me as users or as prospective users. Our community and our customers said, hey, it would be nice if we could just make this simple for our end users who aren't necessarily used to seeing lists of things and knowing what to do. Just default the tile view for us, because they usually set that anyway.
So one thing that I would want to point out, and this is another feature that came from Jan, is if I flip over to the a remote source, so I'm showing information from the Chocolatey community repository at this point. If I flip to the list view here, it's the way it was before. However, there is a new feature that if I enable the show additional package information, and I click back, then even in the list view, you can get icons too. So you can get a smaller icon in the list view. So you can kind of have the best of both worlds, but that's only for remote sources. So the local source, if I'm in list view on the local source, I don't see an icon. But if I'm on the list view in a remote source, then I can have the icon and the information. So you can kind of get the best of both worlds. But again, that's a feature that you need to enable through the settings to enable that. And that's the show additional package information feature.
I see. So with this PC there, that your local source or your local install, just a quick thing to highlight there. So where you'd normally see that icon on the side, you do see a little pin, push pin. Do you want to highlight what that means for users?
So for this one, so it shows it in both the tile view and the list view. So there is a pin icon up in here in both the tile view and the list view. So what that's showing is that I've pinned that specific package. So Chocolatey has the concept of once you've installed a specific package version, if you don't want to have that package change as a result of running Choco Upgrade All or Choco Upgrade directly, then you can pin that package. So that means that if I were to attempt an Upgrade All, this package would be ignored, even if there was an upstream new version of that package. And obviously, I've got the option of unpinning that as well through the UI if I chose to. But that's what the pin icon is there. Yeah.
Awesome. So that's Choco Pin, some functionality that's been there for quite a while in Chocolatey. But one of my favorite things with that is if you have a package that has a dependency, like on a certain version of Java runtime environment or something like something nitpicky like that, then you can set that as your pin. You can pin that individual version so that when you run a Choco Upgrade All, you don't even have to worry about it auto upgrading and then going and breaking and your help desk having to go in and figure out why your app broke because JRE updated itself.
Exactly. So the one other breaking change that I wanted to mention is with regard to, now this is specifically a Chocolatey GUI for business setting, but there's a feature here that is allow non-admin access to settings. Now it's a bit of a mouthful, but essentially what that's saying is that in this new release of Chocolatey GUI, by default, non-admin users are not allowed to access settings. Now, previously, what we said was that a non-admin user would get access to settings, but we've said that that's no longer the case and they can't get in. So the way that I can show that is if I just quickly flip here, if I sign out of my admin user and I sign in again as the highly imaginatively named non-admin user on my machine, and I run Chocolatey GUI, so if I find it in the list here. So this again, I have the Chocolatey GUI I have the Chocolatey GUI license extension installed on my machine. And I can see that just because it's saying, I can see it says business down here in the bottom left-hand corner.
Oh yeah.
So up here in the top, at the top here, where before I would have been able to click settings, that button's no longer there by default anymore.
Ah, perfect.
Okay?
Yeah.
So as a non-admin user on the machine, I can't get access to the settings. And also that's enforced at the command line as well. So as a non-administrator user, if I try and run something like the feature list command, I can't get access to it because, again, I'm a non-administrator user. But what I can do as an administrator is that I could go into that setting, set it globally, enable it globally, so that non-administrator users would be able to get access to it. So I'll just quickly do that while you, if you've got any questions, that would be a good opportunity to do it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set that globally, log back out and log back in again to show that that's flowing through.
So that's great. So basically we have that feature available where the admins can turn that off, Gary, so that their end users aren't getting access to settings that they can play with necessarily. So they can globally set those settings and then go and then stop the access for the local users or the standard users that are non-admins, which is great. But we also still leave the functionality in there for you to be able to turn that off if you do want your endpoint users to be able to do that. Very cool. So
I'm just going to quickly log back in here as the non-administrator user.
And then rerun this.
Open Chocolatey GUI again.
So after this, I think might be good to just highlight the Chocolatey GUI extension just a little bit, because I think we need to differentiate for folks what they need to do as a difference between Chocolatey GUI and Chocolatey GUI extension in order to get that. Yeah.
Yep. So just to finally, so I'm in as a non-administrator user. Now I have access to the settings. So these settings, though, would only be my local settings. Even though I've added the ability to get access to the settings, I, as a non-administrator user, can't do something like Chocolatey GUI CLI feature enable name show console output. I'll get there eventually. I can't set that globally because I'm not allowed to set it globally. I could set it for myself, so I can enable it for me, but I can't enable it for globally because I'm not I'm a non-administrator. Yeah. So the point that you're making there is if I do a Choco list local only here and look at the packages that I have installed, then we'll see that we have where is it? We have Chocolatey, obviously. We have the Chocolatey extension,
which is our licensed extension.
Which is a license extension for Chocolatey. So that's if you're running Chocolatey for Business or you're running a Pro edition, then that is the feature adds. That's the package that you need to install and able to enable the business features of Chocolatey itself.
Like package builder, package internalizer,
exactly, all of those ones. So on top of that, we have the Chocolatey GUI package, which brings the open source version of the WPF application that is Chocolatey GUI. And then on top of that, we then have the Chocolatey GUI.extension package. So it works in very similar way to the Chocolatey extension, where it simply builds on top of the open source version. And assuming that you have a valid Chocolatey license.xml file in place, then it will start to bring in those additional features, that additional functionality into the running version of Chocolatey GUI.
Very cool. Very cool. Thanks for highlighting
in terms of getting access to it, it's this exact same process. You would you have access to the license feed, you download it from the license feed, you maybe internalize it, you put it on your internal networks, and then from there you can deploy it to all of the machines that you want to have Chocolatey GUI license extension installed on.
And then you can start configuring some of the fancier settings for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just going to go back in as the administrator again so that I can continue to show some of these things. So a couple of the new features that got added in, just to go through some of those so that we can highlight them. One, from an open source perspective, what Chocolatey GUI does when it first loads up is that it will attempt to find out all of the packages that are outdated on this machine. So we'll see that already. So in terms of the available packages in my upstream sources, it's saying that the Google Chrome package is out of date. The JRE or the JDK package is out of date. So how it did that is it went out and it essentially ran the Choco outdated command, and it figured out all of those packages that are outdated, and it flagged them as outdated. Now, one of the things that is a little bit problematic at the minute is that depending on how many sources you have and depending on how many packages you have installed, that Choco update command can take a little bit of time to complete. So if all you want to do is get in here and install a package, then kind of waiting around for the outdated to complete is not really something you want to do. So one of the features that we added was the ability to prevent the automated outdated package check. So with this feature enabled, when you first start Chocolatey GUI, it won't run that outdated check. So it just makes it quicker. So to show that in action, there's a button down here that will purge the cached outdated package information. So I'm just going to go ahead and purge that. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run Chocolatey GUI again. What we'll see happen now is that it'll just go straight in. It won't, you'll still see the loading icon a little bit to say that it's doing something, but then immediately it's gone in. But now
it's a way faster refresh than I'm used to. Yeah.
The thing that you lose, though, is you no longer have that information about the outdated packages being shown because you've stopped that from happening. If you want to get that back, then you can still run it manually. So you can still force the outdated check. So at this point, we see Chocolatey GUI doing its thing. It's calculating the outdated packages. And then what will happen then is once that's finished, it will then show that information. But by default, it will no longer run that. Okay. Now, it's a very similar argument for when you flip over to a source. So what's happening here by default, I've just clicked on the community repository, and what it's doing there is it's getting me the first page of results for that source. But again, if all you're interested in is getting into a source to, you know what package you want, and you just want to be able to immediately search for it and not wait for the first page of results, then there's another setting, which is the prevent preload feature. So if I enable that and I go back, and I click on, say, Chocolatey internal, which is my internal repository, then it's not going to go and fetch those results straight away. It didn't do the loading. It just came straight into here. And from here, I can then search for packages that I maybe want to look for. So at that point, it will then provide me the results. So it's all about allowing the user, depending on how they're using Chocolatey GUI, to be able to get in there as quick as possible to perform the functions that they want. So both of those features are open source features. So they are in Chocolatey GUI open source. So you don't need the Chocolatey GUI license extension for either of those features to take advantage of those.
So sort of a performance tuning tweak for both.
It is a little bit. I mean, ultimately, I mean, we want to speed up the Choco outdated command to make it faster, so it doesn't. There isn't that kind of length of time involved in figuring out that information. But in the absence of that at the minute, it is an optimization in terms of performance. But again, it is dependent on how you use Chocolatey GUI. If you want to open Chocolatey GUI to find out exactly what all the packages are outdated, then obviously disabling that or enabling that feature is not for you. You would leave it on by default.
Yeah, exactly. No, that makes sense. So now you can tweak that. That's cool.
You can.
Yeah. So cool.
So I was then going to touch on a couple of business features that were added. That
Go for it.
So the what I'm away to show next are business features that you will need Chocolatey GUI license extension in order for them to operate. So the first one is the concept of. Oh no, I should show that one first. This was new in this release, wasn't it? Keyboard bindings. I think it was.
I believe so.
Let me just check the keyboard bindings. Yes, keyboard bindings. So when I'm looking at my sources, obviously I can click between these and navigate between them, but I can hold down Control and hit 1, and that'll flip me up to the top one. Control 2, Control 3, Control 4. So just quick navigation between the sources from the keyboard. So if you're a keyboard junkie and you want to utilize those functionalities, then we've started adding in keyboard bindings that will allow you to navigate between the different functions within the GUI as well. Again, because we like to provide configurability, you can turn those off. So if you don't want to have the keyboard bindings, you can turn them off. So now I'm hitting Control-1 on my keyboard madly like a lunatic. I can't flip between that now because I've turned that key binding off. Okay. The other one I wanted to talk about was the concept of hiding all remote Chocolatey sources. So this one came about as a result of a support ticket that came in. So what was basically requested was they wanted to use Chocolatey GUI as in a read-only mode, essentially. They wanted to know and provide information about what packages were installed, but they didn't want to allow any operations outside of that. So if I toggle this one on and I go back, nothing will happen. But that's expected because the way that the Chocolatey GUI license extension interacts with Chocolatey GUI, when you make a change, you will have to close and reopen it again. It's just a side effect of how it works, unfortunately, at the minute. But based on you potentially rolling it out to multiple people, setting those settings at a global level, then restarting Chocolatey GUI the first time is not a huge deal. Okay. But what we've got now is that all we're seeing now is the this PC source. We're not seeing the Chocolatey community repository. We're not seeing the internal source or the license feed. They're now all turned off. So the only things I can do here are to then see what's installed on my machine. Now, arguably, there are still operations that can be done. So I can still install and reinstall. However, the other thing that ships now in Chocolatey GUI is that Chocolatey GUI will respect the Chocolatey config that is what operations are allowed when running in self-service mode. So if you are running Chocolatey GUI in self-service mode, then what you can do is you can come into settings and under Chocolatey, then in the allowed, let me find the setting, the background service allowed commands. If you didn't want to allow the install and upgrade, then you can take those out. So when you're running in background mode, when you're running as a non-admin user, you can make it so that Chocolatey GUI is completely read-only. It's there for, essentially it's a storefront really to show what's installed on the machine, giving you a pane of glass over the top of it, but without allowing any operations on top of it.
Right on. So the background service allowed, yeah, exactly. So the background service itself, the Chocolatey agent, the way that it works, and the background service allowed commands were already Chocolatey for Business features. This is an additional Chocolatey for Business feature built on top of that to just make it just a read-only sort of pane of glass.
So in the previous version of Chocolatey GUI, the allowed commands, the way that they would surface through Chocolatey GUI is that Chocolatey GUI itself would allow the operation to happen. So for example, if I'm running as a non-administrator user using Chocolatey GUI and I attempted to click the uninstall button, then it would attempt the operation and then Chocolatey would then enforce the fact that the uninstall operation isn't allowed through background agent. So what we've done is we've brought the knowledge of what operations are allowed into Chocolatey GUI. So now you can't click the button.
I see.
So when we come to here, they'll still be visible, but they'll be grayed out. So you won't actually be able to perform any of these operations other than details to get to the information about the details page. And
so if I'm right in assuming that there'll be a little tooltip floating over it to let you know that that operation is not allowed. Oh, very cool. So now basically we're not breaking them. So in the past, what it looked like was you would respect the setting global Chocolatey GUI Chocolatey config setting, right, from background mode, but it would look to the user like it was a failure in that install.
Exactly that.
But now we've just cleaned it up to make it present to the user with some information to say, hey, this is actually a setting that was configured to be off.
Correct.
Very cool.
So that was that feature. So I'm going to turn that off again. And the other one is I'm going to do is prevent all package icon downloads, which was the other Chocolatey for Business feature that we enabled. So again, I'm going to close Chocolatey GUI, but before I do that, I'm going to purge the icons that I've got stored, that I've got cached locally within Chocolatey GUI. So I've purged those. All of those are still there because it's in the running process. But if I now close Chocolatey GUI and open it up again, then what's going to happen this time is that Chocolatey GUI license extension is going to respect that setting, and rather than reaching out and trying to get all of the icons for the individual packages, which based on the new spec file for a package would actually reach out to the internet to download the icon and make it available, in an air-gapped network, that's not possible. So what would have happened is you would have had a little red circle with a white cross through it, which indicated that it wasn't able to fetch that icon. Now, that's obviously
which
not
to a user looks like it's broken. Like they're like, oh, why?
Exactly that. So it's not ideal. So what we said instead is that if you enable that feature, we're just going to show the Chocolatey icon by default. It's a little bit of a halfway house in terms of doing that, but we feel it looks better. One optimization or one enhancement I've spoken about here is if you're using the branding capabilities within Chocolatey GUI, then you may be able to provide your own icon, so that your business icon would appear here as opposed to Chocolatey when you're using the branding functionality within Chocolatey GUI license extension.
Yeah, and Stevie's also mentioning in the chat that if you wanted to host your icons internally in a raw repo, then you could always rewire some of your packaging to support that too.
Absolutely, yes. But the other thing that we should mention is that ultimately, at some point, when we upgrade the internals of Chocolatey, the concept of embedding an icon into the Chocolatey package will be there. So it will no longer reach out to the internet. The icon will actually already be in the Chocolatey package, and things like Chocolatey GUI would just bring it out of the Chocolatey package for display. So it wouldn't reach out to the internet anyway. So there's lots of plans in this area. And as Stevie said, there are mechanisms to allow for hosting those icons internally and repackaging the package to do that. But there's ultimately an embedded icon technique as well. So
that what you're touching on there specifically, some of the re-architecting that is to happen in the future, like some of the upgrades to Chocolatey internals. Am I right in assuming that some of this is the ideas behind NuGet v3, supporting NuGet v3 eventually?
Essentially. So there's a.
You want to touch on it because I don't know that Manfred.
No, it's fine. Yeah. So just to touch on it a little bit, there is so at the minute, Chocolatey, Choco.exe, when it's looking for packages, when it's installing packages, it requires that it is a NuGet v2 compatible feed. Now there is the concept of a NuGet v3 feed, which is a different architecture. It uses JSON rather than OData. Now Choco.exe at the minute doesn't support that. In order to support that, we have to update the internals of Chocolatey to support NuGet v3. Now, when that happens, there's some additional functionality that comes essentially with it for free. The concepts of different support for different Semver versions within packages, the ability to embed icons, other bits and pieces that we can just essentially then take advantage for free, essentially. But it would mean that things like this, speeding up things like the Choco outdated command that Manfred touched on in the chat room, all of those things we will have access to once those internals are updated. Yes, absolutely.
And that's no small undertaking, right? That's the important point to highlight there too. It will require some re-architecting. Yeah,
it's definitely not. It won't happen in a day. Let's put it that way. There's a few moving parts there, both in terms of Choco.exe itself, as well as the Chocolatey community repository, so that once we enable v3 in the client, the Choco.exe, we'd obviously want to be able to have the Chocolatey community repository be a consumption endpoint for Chocolatey packages using that protocol. But what it does mean is that once Choco.exe supports it, then it opens up the potential for using things like Azure Artifacts or GitHub Package Repository or any other v3 compatible feed that only supports v3 at the minute. You can't use Choco directly against those at the minute, but once we support it in the client, then that opens up the potential for using those as repositories within Chocolatey GUI and Chocolatey GUI.
That's what I'm excited about for sure. But just a level set for folks, I think the timelines always comes up with this. So it is something that we are looking at in the later part of this year, right? Just investigation right now. Yeah. So can't give you a hard deadline on that or timeline on that, but definitely something that will be, explored further this year. Yes, absolutely. Awesome. So I'm just looking through my list. So one of the things I want to touch on is kind of related to the keyboard bindings. But if you're in the list view, then I can just start typing a package name. So at that point, I typed JE, and it took me down to the Jenkins package in the same way that WI Windows. There's some quick navigation now within the list view for keyboard binding. So then I just did the
the Alt menu item to bring up the context menu. So keyboard-driven functionality within Chocolatey GUI got a little bit of a kick in this release. There's much more that we want to do in terms of accessibility support in Chocolatey GUI. That's going to come in future versions, but we're making inroads into that sort of thing as well.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, it's like the dev mode, right? People want to use the keyboard only, so it's nice that you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it is something that we are aware of. I'm actually going to turn keyboard bindings back on again because I miss them now that they're not there. So I'm going to,
and you bring up an important point about accessibility too. You know, folks need easy ways to be able to do that, and there are real limitations around on tools not supporting that type of stuff. So we are committed to that for sure.
So I think what's been highlighted there in the chat room is one of the things that is coming down the pipeline is the concept when you're doing an install. At the minute, when I do an install or I do a reinstall, I don't have the option of passing in any additional parameters to that installation. So if I wanted to pass in a package parameter to say enable some function within the Git package, I can't do that through Chocolatey GUI. From the command line, I can do choco install git -- params and then send in those parameters. What we are working on is the concept of an install advanced mode within Chocolatey GUI. You could, when you go into the details page, there'll be an install advanced option, which will pop up a modal. And at that point, if you wanted to control things like package parameters, install arguments, whether you wanted to force the installation into x86, whether you wanted to do all of these things, all of those customizations will be available within Chocolatey GUI interface.
Very cool. So it's kind
coming.
Of the stuff. Okay, right on. Awesome. That's one of the coming soon features. That's really great. So just to highlight that a little bit for folks who may not be that familiar with it. You know, if you go to chocolatey.org/packages or now community.chocolatey.org/packages, but both URLs redirect, you can go look at the packages on there, and a lot of them will have additional parameters defined that the maintainer has built into that package to make them further configurable. And so the important thing is generally with the Choco install or upgrade commands, you could pass that package param as a params parameter argument to your command. But this will actually expose that at the GUI level. So you can also add that customization there too.
So I'm not sure how well this comes through, but this is the kind of where we are with it. There's a working, let me just minimize this so we can make this bigger. So this is the working am I showing that or am I not?
No, you're not.
So let's copy this and let's bring up. It was on my other screen, so let me paste this in here.
Sure. The pull request. Okay.
So we go down to where Jan's been working on some stuff, and let's make this a little bit bigger. So there's kind of 3 or 4 different ways of potentially doing it. The first one is in a standard take up the whole screen modal. So this is when I've clicked that install advanced option. So in here, I would be able to pass in the package parameters, pass in the install arguments, execution timeouts, force x86, etc. So that's one potential way of doing it. Another one is in a modal window. The thought process behind the modal window was that it was brought up that if I'm on a package details page where it actually lists out all the package parameters that I can pass in, the idea would be that you'd pick up this modal window and be able to move it to the right to be able to see all the package parameters, rather than this style where you can't see any of the details behind it. And the other suggestion was it would be a fly out from the right-hand side. So you would be able to click a button and it would pop out from the right-hand side to then be able to put all these in. In terms of the feedback that we've had so far, that's the modal window is the preferred option so far. So if you have any input on which one is the one that goes forward, definitely feel free to come into this issue and provide some feedback, and we can have a chat about it in there.
Or even vote via emote on the option.
Indeed.
Yeah. Right on. Awesome. Great. So I think we've covered a lot in this stream, and I kind of see we're coming closer to the end of it. But I do want to. We've addressed the questions that have been in the chat. Thanks for Chocolatey folks as well from Choco Fam for answering some of those. In addition to that, I think the one thing that we're going to highlight today was Chocolatey Central Management and the 050 version release, right?
Yes. So I have that installed here. So in terms of what I want to show, there isn't, no, it shows that I can't type the password. Let's try that again. But from an end user point of view, there wasn't much that changed, to be honest. But one thing that we did put in play was support for usage of FIPS compliance checksums. So what I mean by that is, if you're running in a secure environment and you have ruled out the usage of non-FIPS compliant checksums, then the CCM website, when you went in to look at any deployments or computers or any section of the website, it would come up with the loading icon and it just wouldn't work. It wouldn't return any data. That's because the usage of FIPS compliance checksums was preventing code from executing. Now, Chocolatey itself has a feature where you can flip between either supporting FIPS compliant checksums or not. But the decision that we made is that in CCM, we'll just always use FIPS compliant checksums. So if you have that setting enabled on the server that's running the website, that will now work as expected, whereas it wouldn't before. So that was a an improvement. Or we listed it as a bug in the release notes because it was. Once it was enabled, it didn't work. So that was a bug fix that went out in this release. The other one that I wanted to touch on before the big one was that the CCM packages, if I drill down into Chocolatey and then lib, and then I look at one of these install scripts, and then I'm obviously not going to have anything that I can browse it in other than ISE. All the install scripts are now Authenticode signed. So there's a signature block at the end of all the install scripts now. So again, just it was an omission in our build process for the CCM packages in previous releases, but going forward, the Authenticode signatures will all be on all of the installation scripts or packaging scripts within the CCM packages in the same way that they are for Chocolatey license extension, etc. when we ship a release of those.
So pretty much everything we ship as a Chocolatey package now has the Authenticode signatures
exactly
on it. Awesome, that's great.
And the final one that I want to touch on is we listed it as a breaking change in the release notes. From an end user perspective, it wasn't a breaking change, but from a background installation point of view, there was a breaking change. So we were on the fence as to how we were going to list it. So from an end user perspective, nothing changed. It was the issue that we had was there was an edge case. If you were deploying to literally hundreds of machines, potentially thousands of machines, there was an edge case where the reports that came back from a machine as part of a deployment wouldn't make it into CCM. So they would effectively get lost. And the deployment would then at that point essentially be hung. It would be sitting waiting for a response from a machine that had already checked in. So what we added was support for a much more resilient and maintainable checking in mechanism. So if for whatever reason a message from a machine was dropped and it didn't go into the CCM database correctly, there is now a retry loop that happens. So as long as the agent on the client machine that's doing the deployment, as long as that actually does report in once, then at that point there is retry logic on the server side to make sure that everything gets processed correctly. Now, on the back end, we've now made it so that the installation of the CCM service requires an administrator user to run the CCM service. Before, as per our documentation, we had said that it's not supported to not run the CCM service as an administrator, but here's how you do it. Now what we're saying in the docs as well as release notes is that the CCM service has to run as an administrator user. And it has to do that because there's a new folder for each of the message processing that's happening, and those are locked down to the administrator user that's running the service. So that's all documented on the website. So in the same way as the Chocolatey GUI documentation has been beefed up a little bit, we are starting to document some of these features and situations within CCM much more as well. So that's something we have committed to as a team to make sure that we are addressing all of these within the documentation. So that was it. I mean, it's a 0.50 release of CCM. There were both of these features came out from customer involvement, and we feedback, like I say, some of those who are utilizing deployments quite heavily were running into these sort of issues. So we addressed those within this release. So.
And I believe so. Like I enjoy this process because we kind of like, even if customers aren't seeing it or users aren't seeing, the end users aren't seeing big changes, they're still we have that transparency to say, hey, this is some of the stuff that we did on the back end to try and improve the experience for you. So that's really cool. So that last feature that you mentioned, where now we require admin mode, just to clarify, is that an administrator level user on the machine that needs to be installing the service? Is that what you're saying, or the administrator user specifically?
So with someone with administrator rights on the machine, yes, just to clarify that,
perfect.
yes.
So somebody in the administrators group, okay.
Correct, exactly that. And like I say, so that is, these are the release notes for that, and then there's additional information in the issue, and then there's a link off then to the setting up and the configuration of the service. So there's much more information on that area and touching on how that works. So the one thing I did want to point out.
Go ahead.
The one thing I did want to point out is what I'm starting to do as we start to release different versions of products. I am starting to include release videos. So obviously we will still have the documented things that were in the release, but I'm also creating short videos. So this one is like, cool. I don't know, 5 minutes. So I'm just walking through the different things that shipped. So you'll see those starting to appear on the release notes for CCM. Obviously, I've been doing that for Chocolatey license extension. So again, anything that's new is featured in a video, and Chocolatey GUI would have the same thing. So as might not always be me doing it, obviously, because there's other folks on the team as well. But as I'm shipping new functionality, I'm rolling out a release video for illustrative purposes to show what's going on.
Very cool. So also, while you're here, you might highlight just the fact of those videos in the actual features as well. I think you did that before, but the
yes. So what you're referring to there is so if I go to the Chocolatey GUI section and I look at, say, the user interface, and I look at the settings, and I look at the say the purge outdated packages, that one obviously doesn't have a video because I haven't finished that one yet. But if I go to the where do I get the commands?
Yeah.
I just clicked on the wrong thing there. Apologies. Getting excited. Commands, feature. Then there'll be a video in the section that kind of walks through what is the feature command, and then specifically for any given feature. So if I go to the keyword bindings one as an example, then there'll be documentation and screenshots showing what it does, but there'll also be, for those that prefer it, a short video that walks through just that specific feature, how to enable it, how to disable it, what it actually does, and showing what's going on within those as well. So they're all part of a playlist. So you can see them in this form. You can watch them from start to finish. But there is a complete playlist of all the functionality within Chocolatey GUI. There are some missing. I know that I need to go back and fill them in. But that's just time dependent and getting the cycles to do that. But
that's already a great start. Yeah,
it's 23 videos at the minute, but they'll probably be about 30 or 35 by the time I've finished that process. But what I would like to do is then be able to go back and start doing the exact same thing for CCM. So looking at the specific functionality within CCM, creating a group, what it means, how to do it, creating a computer or updating a computer, what it is, what it does. So again, digestible snippets of functionality in a video format rather than big long screeds of text. We still need those big long screeds of text, but kind of just breaking it up into digestible parts that you can watch in video format too.
Very cool. No, that's definitely commitment. We have this geared to our documentation and better ways to make this information accessible to our users. So that's really great. That's amazing, Gary, that we've already run through and created a bunch of those videos, and having them like embedded into our docs makes a huge difference, because I know learners learn things different ways. And so some folks appreciate just reading through the docs. Some folks like the screenshots, but then a lot of people who are visual learners do enjoy the videos to go through.
Yeah.
And sort of you can play through it, and you can pause and you can try it out on your machine, and that's always helpful.
Absolutely.
And I know who doesn't need more Gary in their life. So I love it. Yeah. That's awesome. Okay, well, that's been a really good coverage, and a lot of cool new features with Chocolatey GUI, and some improvements there with central management as well. Thanks so much for that, Gary. I think I will swap over screens now. That's cool, and then we'll just wrap up, because I know we're getting up on the hour already. So yeah, just for your information, folks, a lot of this stuff is available as further links for exploration. Gary's highlighted a couple of them. We'll be sure to include some more information for you as well, hopefully in the description of the video when it goes up as well. But just some things standard with Chocolatey and Chocolatey for Business. Our docs are up there as well. You can go to docs.chocolatey.org. Chocolatey for Business features specifically, we also have a playlist for that if you want to explore that a little bit further. So that highlights Chocolatey GUI as well as a lot of the other features like Package Builder and Internalizer. So that's available at ch0.co/C4B videos. And if you need more Gary in your life, then we have QDE as well, the quick deployment environment setup videos. So if somebody wants to use a quick deployment environment as a part of setting up Chocolatey for Business, then you have ch0.co/QDE videos if you want to check that out. Chocolatey in the Organization is another series that Gary recorded, which is specifically around if you're setting up Chocolatey for Business from scratch in an organization with a distributed environment. So that's ch0.co/org. And if you're interested in some of those Chocolatey for Business features, you can always reach out to sales@chocolatey.io. So that's the last little plug I'll give. And I'm done now. I'm done plugging this sort of stuff. But even if you're a community user and open source user, you can see we have plenty of functionality that we're trying to build for you. And that's basically what we always try and do, right? We try and support both streams as much as possible. So Rob is asking in the chat. Oh, actually, is that Manfred asking in the chat? Where's the April Fool? Yeah, sorry. Some people love them, some people don't. So I err on the side of not really wanting to bug people about this. There's enough things you have to worry about on Twitter and news sources for this type of stuff. I feel like it just adds stress to have to think about something that you're like, hey, is this real or is this not? So nothing here was an April Fool. All of this is real features, folks. You can go and try this out. But yeah, so thanks for joining us, guys, on the stream, and I love the conversations in the chat. So appreciate all those folks who join us every time, and hopefully we'll continue doing this. And if you guys, as long as you guys enjoy it, send us some questions or even requests or ideas for future streams. Just so you know, we do this every first Thursday of the month. So we have a Chocolatey Explain stream, and you have the chance to voice not only your questions in here, but to control what we cover as well. So feel free to tune in. Thanks so much for joining us and giving us your time. On behalf of myself, I'll see you guys next time. Gary?
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye now.